Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sue Gerberick, Director of the Midwest Center for Occupational Health and Safety, Education and Research Center, which most of you know is an ERC, and one of 18 in the country. I just like to welcome you to our annual NORA Symposium, which this year is co-sponsored by our Midwest Center as well as the Upper Midwest Agricultural Safety and Health Center, and that's known as UMASH. We have terrific participation today, and I know people will still be coming in. And all of our guests today include everyone from students and faculty to advisory board members, some of our partners throughout the region that we serve. And among our special guests, I particularly want to recognize Dr. Patrick Shaughnessy, who is director, and Kim Gordon, who is Deputy Director of the University of Iowa ERC. So they've traveled a big distance with 4 students who are also participating in our poster session. So thank you for being here. And also traveling from Marshfield, Wisconsin, are Dr. Matt Kiefer, who's co-director of our UMASH Center and director of the National Farm Medicine Center, and his colleagues. So it's just great to have all of you join us today. We're especially honored with our featured speaker today, who will address a topic of great importance to occupational health and safety. But before we commence the program, I just want to recognize some very special people who have helped to make this a success once again. So that includes Pat McGovern, who is our Deputy Director of our center, and Julie Alcorn Webb, who is our Continuing Education Director for the ERC, Chris Western, Program Associate in the Centers for Public Health Education and Outreach, Diane Campa, I'm not sure where you are, but Coordinator for UMASH, and Ruth Rasmussen, UMASH Outreach Director, Joy Archibald, who is Associate Administrator and also our photographer today, so please take time to have her catch your picture while you're going through the poster session. Also, Karen Brademeyer, our Office Supervisor, Deb Grove, who is a very important Fiscal Officer, Andy Ryan, our Senior Research Fellow, and Ellen Jerome, Office Assistant. So I just want to remind you to review the materials in your folder, including the list of excellent posters that are outside today, and we'll have time for refreshments with those after the session today. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Bruce Alexander, who is Director of the Upper Midwest Center for Agricultural Safety and Health, and among many other activities is also the head of our Division of Environmental Health Sciences.
Thanks, Sue. I want to welcome everybody today on behalf of the Upper Midwest Agricultural Safety and Health Center and also Division of Environmental Health Sciences. This is really a fun day for us every year to get our 2 centers together to showcase some of the work we do, a lot of the work our students do, some of the work we fund through our pilot projects program. Both centers have pilot project programs, so it's really fun to see everybody come together and look at the multidisciplinary work that goes on addressing agricultural safety and health, occupational safety and health issues in the Upper Midwest in the region, including agriculture. And it's also fun to see the multidisciplinary approaches that are used in these activities. And I do want to also recognize the partners for UMASH, which includes not only School of Public Health, but the College of Veterinary Medicine, the Minnesota Department of Health, and also the National Farm Medicine Center of the Marshfield Clinic, which is part of the also the Migrant Clinicians Network, which is part of the Upper Midwest Agricultural Safety and Health Center. So without further ado, I'd like now to introduce Dr. Beth Vernig, our Associate Dean for Research, Senior Associate Dean for Research at the School of Public Health.
Thank you, Bruce. On behalf of the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of our guests who are joining us at the 2016 NORA Symposium. This year's theme, Critical Challenges Facing Occupational Health and Safety Today and Tomorrow, is an ideal theme for our school. Occupational health and injury prevention are a core component of our School of Public Health 2030 strategic planning efforts. In those efforts, we seek to ensure that we are prepared for the world of 2030 and beyond, and we recognize that injury prevention is a key area of focus. We are delighted that Dr. John Howard, Director of NIOSH, is able to be here with us, and I, for one, and I'm sure everybody else agrees with me, is really excited to hear about his presentation on the direction of occupational health and safety. I'm also, on a more personal note, thrilled to have the opportunity to share with all of you our total pride in Sue Gerbrich and the entire occupational health group. I'm an avid member of the Sue Fan Club, as we call ourselves, and love hearing from faculty, students, alums, and others about all of the important things she has done in the field of occupational health and safety. I trust that today won't be any different. And as you know, we've got our two centers, the Midwest Centers and the Upper Midwest Agricultural Safety and Health Center, and we're very excited that they are again collaborating on this major effort. As has already, I would like to acknowledge you, our guests, without whom this day could happen, our community partners and collaborators, and participants from the University of Iowa, the Wisconsin National Farm Medicine Center, and the National Children's Center for Rural Agriculture, Health, and Safety. Again, thank you for joining us.
Okay, so at this time, I have the very great pleasure of introducing our featured speaker, Dr. John Howard, Director of the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, known as NIOSH, in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Some of you may recall that Dr. Howard was also our featured speaker in 2010, so we're most honored that he has again returned to Minnesota to participate in this important event. So as some of you are aware, Dr. Howard has led an amazing career to date, and in addition to his position as director of NIOSH, he also serves as administrator of the World Trade Center Health Program. He was first appointed NIOSH director in 2002 and served until 2008. In 2009, he worked as a consultant with the U.S. government's Afghanistan Health Initiative, and in September of 2009, Dr. Howard was again appointed NIOSH director in the Barack Obama administration and was reappointed in 2015. Prior to his appointments as NIOSH director and World Trade Center program administrator, he served as chief of the Division of Occupational Safety and Health in the state of California's Labor and Workforce Development Agency from 1991 to 2002. Dr. Howard began his career in occupational health as internist in the University of California, Los Angeles School of Medicine Pulmonary Fellowship Program at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. During his clinical work, he worked closely with asbestos-exposed shipyard workers and published research findings related to workplace asbestos exposure and occupational lung disease. Dr. Howard received a Doctor of Medicine degree from Loyola University of Chicago, a Master of Public Health degree from Harvard University School of Public Health, a Doctor of Law degree from the University of California at Los Angeles, and from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., he received 2 more degrees, a Master of Law in Administrative Law and Economic Regulation, and a Master of Business Administration in Healthcare Management. Dr. Howard is board certified in internal medicine and occupational medicine. He's admitted to the practice of medicine and law in the state of California and District of Columbia, and is a member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar. Clearly, he is well prepared for his position, and in his spare time has written numerous articles on occupational health policy and law. So his presentation today, I believe, will truly challenge all of us. So please join me in welcoming Dr. John Howard.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate coming to Minnesota again. It's a great state, it's a great city, and it's a great university. And I wanted to thank each of you for all that you do for worker safety and health throughout Minnesota, throughout the United States, and throughout the world. So today's going to be fun because we're talking about a bit about today, although that's really boring. So we're going to talk more about the future. So let your mind sort of wander and imagine the future that we're all going to be in in some cases sooner than later. So I wanted to characterize a bit some of the things that if you read the social sciences literature, I'm sure that's a shocking thing for somebody like me to say, but you can learn a lot from reading the social science literature. And when you do, you find out that social scientists are trying to characterize differences between what has been and what is coming. And these four characteristics of volatility, which I think we all understand, things are just moving a lot faster. There's a certain velocity to change that's happening. Uncertainty, things seem to be more uncertain. The past doesn't necessarily predict what's going to happen in the future. A normal political candidate may not be the President of the United States in the future, for instance. Complexity. Things are much more difficult to sort out because the very obvious causes that we used to see in the 60s and 70s and maybe the beginning of the 80s in occupational health, where epidemiologists were saying the relative risk is 10 for coal dust, the relative risk for asbestos. We don't see that anymore. Epidemiologists are now trying to figure out, well, we got a 1.10 risk ratio. What is that about? And certainly, we've given up with a lot of complexity. We can't manage it anymore, so we're going to write an algorithm and have some machine do it. Things are much more ambiguous these days. Science is really seldom producing these black and white results that we would all like. And consequently, it requires a lot more interpretation. And interpretation now is more polarized. So there are whole investments occurring where people are doing the science, and there are investments occurring where people are saying, are you really sure about that methodology that you use? We don't even think your result, and we're going to take your results and we're going to reanalyze them ourselves. And now government agencies like my own have to post data from our scientists so that they can be reanalyzed. So these are just some of the things that are happening. So I thought we would look at some issues in some depth, but not in the depth that some of you may be interested in, so you may have to do a little research in this area. Economy and the jobs, jobs and automation, employment arrangements themselves, sensors, and the Internet of Things. A little bit about predictive analytics, and the question is, are safer companies a better investment? Should you be putting your money in a safer company? Should you try to figure that? Ask your analyst about that. So, you know, the economics of our time are really characterized by three things. One is a slower growth in the GDP. There's a decline in manufacturing employment. And there's a rise in low-wage service sector jobs, especially concentrated in healthcare, leisure, and hospitality industries. So if you look at manufacturing, you can clearly see where manufacturing employment is going. I don't have to point to it. You can see that it's a cliff, and U.S. employment has fallen off of it. The issue about GDP has been extremely difficult. The little pink bars here on the histogram indicate recessions, and the recession that we have that currently is going on, the Great Recession, which economists now call, you can see that the GDP is not growing as much as it used to, and in fact, the revised GDP in the last quarter is actually revised down to 0.5%. So the question is, well, how can we increase productivity? Well, one way to increase productivity is to increase the number of workers who are doing the work. As you know, capital, innovation, and workers labor determines productivity growth. Well, the workforce growth hasn't been very exciting, and it's not going to be exciting, actually. The peak of workforce growth in the United States occurred in 1970. After that, workforce participation has declined. Now, recently it's gone up a bit, but it is overall a trend that's going the other way. And obviously, adding workers through immigration is becoming increasingly difficult, especially with the big wall and all. So the increase in hours worked is an interesting way to look at. Well, let's just have people work more. Well, that really is antithetical to the issue of productivity, because productivity is output per hours in, and so you don't want people working that much. Productivity measures. But, you know, certainly if you wanted to beef up the workforce labor. You could have workers work more. But when you look at the way we work versus the way the French work and other developed countries, we already exceed other developed country averages. So what about if we just push the retirement age off? And so we all work longer if those people are interested in retiring at the maturation age. And of course, you all know the story of Franklin Roosevelt, you know, when they came into his office and they said, Franklin, we have a really good idea for preventing these chronologically gifted Americans from ending up in the poorhouse as they age. We're going to have Social Security. And it's a great idea, Franklin said. What age are you planning to peg the maturation retirement age? And they said, 65. Great, sounds great. What's the average life longevity of the Americans today? 62, Franklin. So clearly, this thing was never designed to work in a longevity area where now we're approaching 80 years of age. So, you know, increasing these or pushing these benefits maturation age off also has another, I think, important issue. If you do hard physical labor, and you got to wait instead of your normal maturation age, which may be 65, depending on your birth cohort, and say, no, you got to work another 5 years. This is really fundamentally unfair to those that work in hard jobs. So increasing productivity, this is a great idea. We hear a lot about STEM education, how that's going to increase productivity. It's really hard to tell, but when you look at the jobs that are the Bureau of Labor Statistics tells us are jobs of the future, only registered nurses and operation managers will require education beyond high school. Otherwise, the rest of the jobs don't. So here's a recent job creation by the last year, from 15 to 16. So you can see that education and health jobs lead the list, professional services, hospitality, construction, financial services, and manufacturing way down. So it may not be possible to use education as a way to increase productivity. One of the big things that's happening now, and you'll hear about this in the presidential election, is the issue about candidates' attitude about trade. And the theory is developed countries like the U.S. adjust to import competition by moving workers from a job that trade has disappeared because that job went to China or Mexico or somewhere else. They can go into other jobs. Now, a lot of people don't believe that, and for years economists have said, you know, it just takes a little more time. It doesn't happen all at once. But, you know, I think as the Nobel Prize winner Krugman wrote in the New York Times recently, serious economists have never really supported the Panglossian view of trade as a win-win for everyone. And in fact, there are some papers now from MIT School of Department of Economics showing that the benefits of trade don't necessarily justify its cost. These are the kind of issues that will grip public policy debates in the next few years. Some candidates talk about NAFTA as a Mexico kind of stealing all the jobs, but the real increase in imports, meaning imports are somebody's got to make that import and the job has to go with it, and so the job is where the import is being manufactured. And you can see from this curve that it's really not in Mexico. So the new scholarship, I think, is really interesting if you really want to get into this. David Autor at MIT has also co-authored several papers, one written in 2014 and this one, recent one in the National Business Economics report in 2016, really is an interesting scholarly bottom to the public policy debate that you will hear about in the election. So let's talk about jobs and automation. So because the Ag Center is here, naturally I'm pandering to them. So I wanted to show you a picture of what's happened in agriculture. So 1914, 1 in 3 Americans worked on a farm. 2016, it's less than 2%. The experts here probably know, I think it's around 1.8%, 1.7% of Americans work on a farm, but they produce more food. So this is a lettuce thinner in the beautiful Salinas Valley in California. It replaced 60 lettuce thinners, and now we have a mechanized lettuce thinner. So you can see in agriculture, mechanization and other things are just, and it's in agriculture. People don't think of agriculture as a leading technological industry, but clearly it is. And then when you ask an economist, well, is this something weird or not? They'll say, no, it's not really weird at all, because when you look at employment as a country develops, you can see that its agricultural employment starts to decrease, its general industrial employment starts to decrease, and its service sector starts to increase. And indeed, in the United States today, 80% of workers are in the service sector of some sort. So the question arises, how far can this automation thing go? Well, I hate to tell you, but it can go quite far. And in fact, in studies done at Cambridge, in Cambridge University, they estimated 47% of job categories would be subject to automation in the next 2 years. And you can see from this chart, thank God, recreational therapists will be the last to go. But clearly on the bottom here, you have telemarketers, which are always on my #1 list. And indeed, they're pretty much gone, because now there are robo things you can't even talk to. All you can do is hang up. Accountants and auditors, 94% probability, they're going to be gone. Clearly, you can have an algorithm do all that kind of work. Retail salespersons, you can't find them in the stores anyway. Technical writers, we'll go into that. But it does create this sociological issue of, you remember the Luddites? Everybody studied, political science and economics. The Luddites went around smashing all the textile mills in Great Britain at the beginning of the first industrial revolution because they just couldn't accept reality. Well, the question is whether, we think manufacturing is very noble, and every politician will tell you going to bring back all the manufacturing jobs and that sort of thing. But the question is, can we adjust in terms of our employment to 80%, 85%, 90% of our jobs in service versus the more nobler type of profession of manufacturing? So let's talk about this. So here's some pictures of what are called industrial robots. They're anchored to the ground and they go like this and they make cars and all of that. These things started back in the 70s. Nothing new here, but they're certainly used quite a bit. The reason that robots are used is, I hate to tell us, but they're much better at us at doing many, many, many things. Obviously, the mundane, the repetitive, precise jobs are clear candidates for a robot. And they've already taken over as the primary workers in a lot of factories. They have perfect memories. They have ultimate internet connectivity to a high-powered CPU, which is a little more high-powered than ours. They can do all sorts of data analysis. They provide informational support beyond any human. They don't forget anything. They keep a perfect record. I'm telling you, these things have perfect recall, and humans just do not. So they often can be placed in management positions where they can remind a team of their deadlines, of procedures, of errors that they're making, of straying out of the box that a human being sometimes does in terms of ethical issues. So we're now seeing more humanoid robots, robots that kind of look like us. They're not attached to the ground, and they're physically in the same workplace with human workers. So we have robot workers and human workers. And indeed, we now see a lot of companion robots that are happening. This is Pepper, which you can buy for about $1,400 here. He's sharing jokes with some friends of his. Aldebaran sells Pepper, and I would encourage you to buy it. I would have a slide here of a Buddhist monk robot who has just been taken over wisdom giving in terms of visitors to a monastery outside Beijing. He's a cute little guy, comes in a gold robe and everything. I didn't have a chance to put him in here, but clearly he's dispensing. You can ask him questions and he'll give you answers. The issue about whether a robot can manage us, because let's face it, humans have a hard time managing other humans, but let's give robots a shot. And certainly at MIT, which is the home of marrying computer science with robotics. The questions asked in that laboratory was, could this really happen? So this is a little article from the Harvard Business Review. It's an interesting experiment where they put some human beings in a room and with a bunch of computers, and they had to, take this file, open the file, rename the file, close the file, that kind of activity that a human should be able to do. And they had a robot that was the team manager, and the robot would be giving, commands, telling them to correct this and that and the other thing. So 86% of the participants obeyed the robot with all their robot instructions all the way through the 80-minute mark. And they talked to the robot, because sometimes the robot would lower the voice, so I can't hear you, what did you say? And then, so all that interaction was going on. The robot also would sometimes give the wrong instructions, confusing instructions. And the human would just follow it, because he figured, well, he's the boss, and we got to do what he says. And then after the test, they said, well, why did you do that? Why did you follow it? Well, we thought the robot was kind of broken, but, we went through that. So clearly, humans can do things that they may not want to do because a robot manager will tell them to do it. So here's a little listing. If your job is in here, I'm sorry to hear that. But here is a listing of jobs that I think are probably right now being taken over by robots, so you're lucky you still have it. Financial analysts, clearly, you don't need a robot, a machine, an algorithm can look at the market much quicker than the investment guy can. Online marketers, yes, I'm all for that. Anesthesiologists, surgeons, diagnosticians, people that do differential diagnosis for a living. If you saw the YouTube video with Watson versus about 10 chiefs of medicine throughout the United States, it was embarrassing for the chiefs of medicine. Okay, so Watson beat them every single time in diagnosing the physical findings and the symptoms that were given to him. E-discovery is being done now by law firms because it's very expensive to have human beings do it. 70% accuracy for Supreme Court cases. And I think that we will only see this more and more. The risk of automation, interestingly enough, is not really that high for the U.S. We're sort of at 47%. But for these other countries that are on a different trajectory, developmental-wise, the risk of automation is much higher. Because they have more jobs that can be automatized or roboticized. Clearly, robotics used to be very, very expensive. It's not so expensive anymore. The payback period for investment in robotics is really decreasing significantly. This is a very large Citigroup research report that if you're interested in robots, I would encourage you to read. On the safety and health area, this is probably a little bit of a gap. There's a 2012 study that is an ANSI consensus standard that was just updated from previous years. It's pretty much oriented to manufacturing fixed robots, the industrial robot. It really isn't that up to date with new robotics. If you look on the OSHA site, you see something that's really quite old to 1999. So it does open the question in occupational safety and health, is there a subfield for occupational robotics? I think there is, and I think that we need to pay more attention to it. This is a little robot picture that is on a science blog that we did at NIOSH on this issue about robot-human interactions in terms of the risk profile for this. And I wrote a paper that was published at the beginning of this year about occupational robotics, trying to get my head around the idea of where do we go in safety and health when we have two kinds of workers in a workplace. And clearly, I think safety and health practitioners need to be directly involved in the development of international standards in this area. And obviously, these standards need to be done for all aspects of occupational robotics. And clearly, we need to be more proactive than we are. Instead of just watching this thing develop, we need to really be involved in it. And then we need to figure out what are the redundant safety measures that protect or will protect a worker who is working side by side with a robot worker. Clearly, the hierarchy of controls can be applied here to look at the risk profile of occupational robotics, and you may have to marry yourself to an engineering school that's interested in this area, in a computer science school, but I think all of these kinds of interdisciplinary opportunities are there for all of us. And ultimately, we have to be told by a computer, I'm sorry, but you really can't do that, and I can't do that for you, as you know from 2001. So let's look a little bit at another changing reality that I think is happening, and that is the change in work itself. We have a marriage between engineering and digital technology, which we just reviewed. We have increasing miniaturization, robotization. We have smart systems that are kind of replacing that human-machine interface. And we have more emphasis on knowledge products, digital work products. We don't all need to be in the same place. We can be nomadic. We can be geographically separate. We can be virtual. And with that sort of barrier, taking away those barrier obstacles in space and time, we really have another definition of a workplace. And it's a challenging one because we're used to living in the last century, in the middle of that century, when all of our occupational safety and health paradigm was built. And we all worked at a place owned by an employer, and we worked there our whole life, and we pretty much had the same job maybe. There was some mobility, but not too much. We got the gold watch and we retired and all that. So that's pretty much gone, except for government, God bless government, and for academic centers maybe. But in the real world of private sector life, that world is pretty much does not exist. So we may have gigs instead of a job. You know, it's a gig. You have a gig, you know. So show people use that word. So my gig, I'm going to appear in Poughkeepsie and that tonight. I'm going to go to Boston the next night. I'm going to do all these shows. So the idea of people who are 19 or 20 looking at, well, a job, you know, my resume shows I've been there 2 years. It's time to move on, you know. They look at my resume. I worked at Cal OSHA for 12 years. They go, what was your problem, you know? So clearly there's a different paradigm going on here. We're maybe getting into that shorter job, and some of those jobs, as you know, like Uber, Lyft, and several others, are coordinated through a mobile app. Right now, my job is not coordinated through a mobile app, but it may be in the future. Lastly, there are new employment arrangements. Now, we're going to talk about some of those, but I want to make clear it's a matter of perspective. So, long-standing work arrangements in blue-collar world have always been temporary. Construction, for instance, as an example. Agriculture, maybe. But they're being newly applied to non-construction, non-agriculture settings. They're being applied to what we would call the white-collar work. So, we all know the old paradigm. You know, the Industrial Revolution created these vertical structures. Everybody was in a corporation or something. Different jobs are differentiated. A good job I described before, you know, it's an employee, as the law understands the employee right now, because say the word employee doesn't mean a whole lot, as we'll see. And you work for that company, and then you retire from that company, and all that sort of thing. And the government built all of our social protection laws based on that paradigm. As I told you about Social Security and the Fair Labor Standards Act, Medicare, et cetera, the companies got a lot out of that. But now there's been some erosion. So we've moved from stability to precariousness. Okay? And I use the word precariousness because it describes a characteristic of new employment relationships or alternative relationships or whatever your word is, contingent, temporary. There's all sorts of words, not well defined. So the normal relationship has eroded. So we've gone from a company having an internal labor market to us all being in an external labor market. We have a temporariness attached to our jobs now. We have more insecurity, from permanent employment to downsizing to temporary to unemployment. It now seems to be a cycle that we may go through many times in our career. We may get used to it. A decline in social protections, clearly, because if you're not an employee, as the law defines it, then you don't get some of these social protections. And there's a disempowerment going on, the declining unionization in the private sector, the lack of the ability to have collective action. And some of these new workers are powerless to exercise the legal rights that I'm granted as an employee of a traditional last century employer. They may not be able to file a claim for this, that, or the other thing because they're not covered by that. They may not be able to file an OSHA complaint because they are not an employee. They may be viewed as a contractor. So this is from the Wharton School, and it's just one way of looking at this. And I would draw your attention to these boxes of the way economic work is organized. And I draw your attention to the employment side there. And the first column there is direct employment, okay? Direct employment is like what I do. In other words, my employer has operative control over everything I do. And believe me, exercises it every day of the week, okay? But if you look at that second column, the co-employment column, that's where a third party is now going to enter the relationship that I as an employee may have. So I'm going to have an employer, and I'm going to have an employer, and I'm going to have me. And that third party, called all sorts of names. I can be called dual employer situation. I can call that employer the agency that hired me, that's now sending me out to the University of Minnesota to work on a project. I can work for a professional employee organization, a PEO, that sends me to the University of Minnesota and keeps me there for 5 years. And I get totally integrated into the Human Resources Department because my PEO took over the university's Human Resources Department. Okay? Or I can be temporary, very temporary. I go and come a lot, okay? The other side is contract work, the independent contractor that we classically know, okay? But we're going to concentrate on that column that has temporary work, okay, that has the most precariousness associated with it, okay? And you can draw your own chart. This is just a Wharton School chart that you can do. I just drew this to say that agency or temporary employment, health services, employee leasing, et cetera, that temporary category is about 70% of total co-employment relationships. That third party added to the traditional relationship that we had in the last century. So how often does this occur? Well, it's a little hard to say. The numbers are all over the place. So if you look at the BLS, they'll say, well, 95 to 2005, there was an increase of 9.3 to 10.1% of total employment. Now, meanwhile, there is no national definition of what I just talked about. So really, do you really trust these numbers when you don't know really what you're counting? For in the last decade, 2005, 2010, here's some data, 10.1 to 15.8% of total employment. That represents a 9.4 million increase over a 10-year period. Well, we didn't even add that many jobs. So there's got to be a net decline in the number of workers in standard arrangements in order to account for that. And this is a great paper also that you should look up, the Katz paper in 2016, just published. The 2010 National Health Interview Survey, which NIOSH uses, and this is a NIOSH paper, 18.7% of 27,000 adults that we surveyed were in non-standard arrangements. That's about 29 million workers. The GAO did a paper last year, 2015. They said, we give up. 5% to 33%, we're not sure. So nobody knows the prevalence of these new arrangements, but they clearly exist. And they clearly exist. Big employers like them more than smaller employers. They're using them more. And people in the South like them more than people in the Midwest. So 126% change in the South, only 170%, 17% change in the Midwest. Only 68% in the Northeast. If you do a chart of unionization in the United States by region, it could correlate. So the question is, well, why do employers like this, doing this stuff? Well, one is you can get expertise when you need it. You don't have to hire it forever. You can just call on it. So domestic sort of outsourcing to smaller firms to tap into their expertise is really helpful. Flexible staffing. You know, things go up and down customer-wise. Well, you don't have to have all those employees on. You bring them in when you need it. The first time I went to Qualcomm to do a consult years ago when I was working at Cal OSHA, I walked in, they told me, well, there's only a third of our employees working now because we closed all projects for the time being. 2/3 of their workforce were temporary. Costs can be saved. Clearly, the cost of expert service are less when they're gotten on the market versus hiring them forever. it also reduces social protection costs. A lot of things don't have to be paid: the health, the pension, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance. And the last issue is very important. Capital has to be raised by companies, and financial markets are saying, we're not going to lend you that much. Shed all of anything but your core activity. Get rid of all your peripheral activity, or else we're not going to lend you money. So you look at the Marriott Hotel. It's got the big Marriott name on the top, right? You go in, you go to the restaurant. Who runs the restaurant? And there's a contractor running the restaurant. You go talk to a chambermaid. I work for the Chambermaid Association that sent me here. You go and talk to the engineer. Well, no, we're a contract engineers. But who works for Marriott in the building that says Marriott? So you've been able to take the brand and use it, and you'd be able to then hire people outside of your thing. So then the question asks, well, why do people do this? And this is an interesting survey by the American Staffing Association, and people can check, whatever box here, so this is why the numbers don't add up to 100%. But it's interesting. Almost half of the people say it's a way to get a permanent job. So you have to say to yourself, this is a desperation type employment. People don't really want this to work this way, but they're trying to get a permanent job, and they have to get it this way. And then lastly, was unable to find a permit. You add those together to obtain work experience. That may be a younger person trying to get into the workforce, et cetera. So that it may be, this is like a cry for help to me when I look at these numbers in terms of temporary employment. Clearly, there are a lot of issues in new economic work. There's management issues. How really do you manage these human workers that are working in different arrangements? There's lots of legal issues. We won't get into that. There's also economic issues, about temporary work being low-wage work. We all think of it, it's low-wage work. I'm not 100% sure that's still true. When you look at this chart, a lot of detail. I may not see it from your place. But when you look at the column where it says percent change 2004-2008 in employment, you can see from the highest number actually is 87.2%, which corresponds to legal, 49.7%, which is business and financial. These are not low-wage workers, okay? So it shows the pervasiveness of this phenomenon throughout the white-collar world. So what I want to do is just give you we could do a whole talk on this, a little, sort of thumbnail about what are the safety and health implications. And this is just using a crude differential risk analysis. In other words, here's the temporary, here's the non-temporary, how do they differ? Their access to social insurance benefits definitely differ. There's a paper in Health Affairs showing that temporary workers have unequal lifespans to permanent workers, standard employment. The Spanish at the University of Barcelona have done a lot of work in this area. John Banach has written paper after paper showing that this type of work is a work determinant of health, and it is impacting general health issues. There's lots of studies, some from NIOSH, about mental health and stress, and there's some specific risks associated with mortality, morbidity for injury and illness. This is just a slide about a study that we did from the Quality of Work Life Survey. You can see that people in the purple are really the true temporary workers, and their percentage of stress is way outside of that of the other workers. Here's European data. Sadly, the Americans don't have a lot of data in this area, showing overall mortality of 1.2 to 1.6 times higher. I put this bullet here: the conventional research practice of treating the employed as a single group actually could end up attenuating the association that really exists. So we could be dampening down the kind of things that we should be seeing. And I think it's a lesson to all epidemiologists here that we may have to do this work a little more carefully. And this article in 2003 is really good. If you look at CFOI, you'll find that there's a big differential risk. 70% of all workers were killed in alternative work arrangements. According to CFOI, they represent only 3% of the people studied, so that clearly. We've looked at this issue and reported an odds ratio of fatal incidents of 2.8, and this is a paper that came out in 2013. Clearly, we see mortality risks. We also see injury risks looking at the European literature. The American literature is very scant. We have it in petrochemical industries. We've had it in plastics manufacturing. Washington State did a good worker comp injury claim rates. And ProPublica did a great article. This is the investigative online journalist organization. They used Florida worker comp data, found an injury odds ratio close to 4 for temporary workers. It's a very interesting paper to read. Illness, Europeans have some really nice stuff. The U.S., I'm sorry, not so much. We just don't do research in this area, sadly so, but we're trying to stimulate that, so get to work. So, the question is, well, why are these differential risks occurring? Well, here's some ideas. They're just my ideas. I have no idea if they're right. New economy jobs are more hazardous than the standard jobs, usually because that person has less experience. Familiarity with the operations. They just got there that day. And in fact, OSHA, David Michaels always talks about the tragic incident of the worker who came to work for Tropicana in Florida, and the first day on the job he's gone. He had to clean out some machinery, et cetera, that he didn't know how to do. They have fewer hours of safety training that's relevant for the job that they may be assigned to. They have more distant relationships with the people at work. So, there's a sort of social relationship that happens that protects workers. They don't have that. They may have limited availability and trained use of PPE. They're less likely to report unsafe conditions. I mean, they work for a temporary agency, lucky to have the job, and they're going to go around complaining all the time. It's not hard to figure out. And there is a lot of confusion about who is an employee and who is responsible, because you have to be an employee and then you have to have an employer. It's a long, convoluted, confusing test that you have to do. The common law test basically is the test that OSHA uses, which is control and direction. If you control and direct that employee, you're the employer, whether you say that employee, no, it's not my employee, that's an independent guy, works for somebody else. OSHA will still give you the citation and it will stick. The economic realities test is sort of a broader test. It's like, let's look at the economic realities here. Who's paying this guy, et cetera. The IRS has a 20-item test to look. Why is the IRS interested? Because all these employers are saying, we don't owe any employment taxes. That's an independent contractor. The IRS will go through all 20 of those things and say, sorry, but you have to pay. The courts have gotten into this as a whole other thing. So here's some idea. We need definitions for research, and I think this is something that you all should take into consideration. We need improved surveillance for these. We need to develop these cohorts. We need to look at models that we have existing for employment quality. The quality of employment is this precariousness factor, and I'll just leave it at that. And as I say, John Banach has come up with a scale called the Employment Precariousness Scale, the EPRIS scale. As I say, the Spanish are way ahead of all of us here, primarily because of the Spanish recession and unemployment, et cetera. There's lots of studies that I could think of. Prospective study of health consequences of new employment relation, kind of hard to do. People are moving around a lot. An intervention effectiveness study. And clearly what we're trying to do at NIOSH is emphasize this new organization of work as a distinct research area. And we have a cross-sector program on healthy work design and worker well-being for the third decade of WARA. So clearly, these findings are real, and something is going on here. We need better taxonomy, better surveillance, and new research methods. Clearly, who's somebody starting out looking for a PhD work, this is your thing. So let's talk about sensors a little. This is, I think, a very dynamic and exciting area. We all have 5 of them, generally speaking. And what's really interesting about sensors is the fact that the technology underlying our 5 senses is really expanding exponentially. And the type of sensors that are going to be available, environmental, wearable sensors attached to our clothing, embedded sensors that are taking stock of our internal biological milieu, are certainly going to be the types of sensors that we're going to look at. And then, of course, Fantastic Voyage. A lot of people in this room are too young to remember. This is Raquel Welch's finest film in a long history of great acting. But they shrunk all the people and they put them through the vascular system and took pictures and everything, encountered several adventures. But, this is a pill that can measure internal body temperature for heat stress. It's just a crude example of what you could embed biologically speaking. This is fascinating. I mean, for an internet company like Google, which is a great company because when I went there and we had lunch in the cafeteria, there were no cash registers, so that is like, to me, the best kind of company to work for. They came up with a prototype of this new lens, okay? So it's equipped, with a lot of stuff that can measure the glucose in your conjunctival fluid, send a signal to your artificial pancreas, to your doctor's office, or to your online log, so it will tell you what your blood glucose is. Now, does anybody know the cost, the current market valuation of the things you stick in your finger industry to tell what your blood sugar is? $2 billion. This thing's going to replace a $2 billion industry. That's called disruptive innovation. And Google is doing this. Okay, it's in GE. Google is doing this. So there's a lot of direct reading instrumentation and sensor technology that's on the market already. Everybody's quantifying themselves. In fact, my definition, if you're not modern, if you're not quantified, you're not a modern person and you belong in the last century. So clearly there's a lot of ways to do that. And 23andMe is, a great example. Anybody's done 23andMe? Help, see, everybody's got 3 people in this century. Okay, so moving on. So we have a lab on a chip. That's old. And now, how many stuff can you measure on that chip is really increasing into the hundreds now. We have a Center for Direct Reading and Sensor Technologies working with EPA on this. Obviously, they go out and measure ozone and dust in the Bryce Canyon and all that. We're not so much interested in that. And, of course, there's a citizen science initiative the White House put out where you, too, can go out and measure the dust in your community and pollution and all that. It's a little harder to apply to occupational safety and health. I wouldn't think 3M would want all their employees going around measuring the inside of their company. But, it's paradigm's a little more difficult for us in occupational safety and health, but it will come, and some industrial hygienist will be leading the lead there. Clearly, exposure science, I think, is going to change a lot in the next few years. And whether you're measuring the work environment with direct reading instruments or sensors or the biological environment, it's going to be a different kind of world. And this is just one example I want to show you. These are robotic insects that from the Weiss Center at Harvard. These are about the size of a penny, as you can see here. They're patterned on the Diptera, the housefly, which can you imagine your PhD thesis is looking at the housefly flies around. So this is an 80 milligram flapping wing robot that's modeled loosely on the Diptera from the Weiss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering. I love that name. So, let your mind wander. You stick a little nano camera on it, a little exposure sensor. There's an industrial hygienist sitting back in a cushy office looking at the computer screen, getting streams of 24/7 data from the flying insect who's going around measuring all of the things that needs to be measured in that workplace. And this article in Science, I think, is really exciting. You should really look at it. So, if you connect all those sensors, and you can attach these sensors to anything, and clearly they are being attached to milk cartons and roads and bridges and everything. And you attach them to everything in the workplace. You don't need an industrial hygienist running around with the little thing trying to figure out what's going on. You'll have sensor data coming in, and you turn the industrial hygienist, I say, into a data scientist, which if you look at BLS jobs that are increasing, you'll find a big blip in that. So clearly, I think these sensors are going to be at the heart of everything. And they become intelligent assets for the company. And the industrial hygienist, as I say, sort of leaves the old world, not that they would totally not be connected to it, but they leave that old world, they come into a new world, where the issue is, what do I do with all this data? And then the data analytics part comes in, and you got to figure out, I got all this data coming in every second for the last 7 days, and I need to look at it, and how do I interpret it, and then what do I do with it? What recommendations do I make? And maybe some of that becomes automated. I don't know, but it clearly is a very different thing. So that leads us into predictive analytics and what we do in the safety area. And clearly, the definition of big data is really kind of mushy. It's hard to tell. You look at one book, you look at the other. But most people think of it as high volume, high velocity, and high variety data. That information assets that demand cost-effective, innovative forms of information processing to do decision making. So whether you're trying to figure out a differential diagnosis of a patient or whether or not you're trying to figure out, I got all this sensor data coming in from this manufacturing plant, you have to sort of figure out, what do I do with this? Because the volume in exabytes and petabytes and all that are going to be so huge that you have to figure it out. And so you get into this whole 3 V's of what I call driving dimensions of big data. So the volume, you're going to increase a whole bunch of job site observations, more than one industrial hygienist can do. You're going to increase the number of observers because these observers are going to be attached to things, to people, inside people, or flying around. You're going to have a whole bunch of variety of methods. In the old methods, so you sort of had discrete data, chunks. Now you have sensor data that's streaming, through. So it's always coming to you. There's no little, I went out last week and I measured here. No, this is always coming to you. And it's obviously coming, at the speed of electrons. The analysis and interpretation is a bit stunted right now because we have humans doing it, because they're going to have to figure out how to analyze it. And at some point, they're going to do that, and then they're going to write an algorithm, and then we're all going to follow that algorithm. Clearly, the data revolution is everywhere, and you can see it in every part of industry. So it's something you cannot escape from. I just wanted to point out, there's the good and the bad of everything. And this article is from Wired in 2008. And if you read Wired regularly, it's sort of like the National Enquirer of science. So you get a lot of really wild kind of stuff happening in Wired. So this is a great article, The End of Theory, the Data Deluge Makes the Scientific Method Obsolete. Okay. So it's a little provocative, but if you read Wired, you're not shocked by that. With enough data, the numbers speak for themselves, right? So epidemiologists, forget it. We don't need you anymore, okay? So on the other hand, this is a great article also. Are we making a big mistake? And this is a 2014 article. There are a lot of small data problems that occur in big data. And I think this is really the take-home message for those of you that think scientific method's going out the window. Not yet, because big data has a lot of issues to it. Getting insights out of the data is really the struggle that human beings are going to have to do. And this is a really great article that you can look up. This whole area of data and knowledge-based capital. Okay, so we know what capital is, a bunch of money that starts businesses, et cetera. Capital formation also now is being looked at as knowledge-based. It's a new source of economic growth. And if you looked at the way accounting has done in the past, on the balance sheet, there's all the tangible assets. There's some little lines that have the intangible assets, sort of, what we do in this company and our knowledge and all that. Well, now we're beginning to see that the old accounting methods are not accounting for all those intangibles and all the investment in knowledge. And so this is just a little chart of tangible versus intangible as a percent of GDP. And you can see that the investments that are happening in knowledge-based capital are far outweighing the investment in tangibles. Largely because you don't need all these buildings, which is a lot of the tangibility of companies. So it's a very interesting development. And Gartner, which does a lot of information asset sort of collection of data, they say that data will essentially be on the balance sheet as an intangible asset of a corporation within the next few years. And safety and health data, as we'll see in a minute, could be part of that. And then the question is, what's the financial how do you value that big data? And so my view is, theoretically, if you could put the right sensor systems and software in place, access it through computing power, 100% accurate forecast would be possible. That sort of ultimate promise of big data. It's going to help us predict the future. And that sort of theory has led to the birth of predictive analytics. And that's why I say that I think being a data scientist, and I think we're going to have to get rid of these titles of epidemiologists and industrial hygiene, data science is going to be the new department in academics, et cetera, where you have big data initiatives and broader combination of skills than your traditional statistician. So if you go to Google and you ask somebody, you're a data scientist, and then you say, what did you really do before? And they'll say, oh, I was a biostatistician, or I was an epidemiologist, or I was a computer programmer, or whatever. So all of these things are kind of merging into this new data scientist role. I think it's a very interesting thing. And so when you look at data scientists by country, and these are the last few years, the blue bar being 2013, you can see that we're not doing too bad. We're kind of falling behind the Netherlands and Luxembourg. So, you know, you have to ask yourself, what is going on in Luxembourg, you know? And there is an answer to that. But you have to look at us in comparison. And if you read the Synergist, the article that some folks at NIOSH did, Turning Numbers into Knowledge, what are the implications for safety and health from big data? And that really is an open question. It's not clear that we know what to do with it or how to get there. I went to a conference once, I asked, it was the Environmental Health and Safety magazine, top 50 companies or whatever. I asked how many people are using predictive analytics. Everybody raised their hand. I said, how many understand what they're doing? And nobody raised their hand. So clearly, we would like something better than these lagging indicators. You know, how many bodies did you, et cetera, how many people did you worker comp, all that is lagging. We want something that is a leading indicator. That's the gold standard. We want a leading indicator. And a lot of companies are doing that. And there's a lot of institutes. The Institute for Work and Health in Toronto is doing a lot of work trying to figure that out. And there's a lot of anecdotes out there. There are a lot of trade publications that have an interest in this. But there's really very little in the way of rigorous scholarship on this issue. My own view is I don't think there's going to be 1, 2, or 3 of these indicators, if they ever exist. They may be very sector-oriented, very establishment-oriented, very activity-based oriented, and they may not be truly predictive, so I wouldn't bank on that. So the last question I have is, you know, are safer companies safer investments? And, you know, this is an interesting question, and there's been some work in this area, both starting with the Gray paper in 2007, Good Workplace Health and Safety, Good Investment Returns. It was a Goldman Sachs paper, which is very interesting to read. And then there was another paper in 2013 on the business case for safety, which was a National Safety Council paper, a little more marketing for the National Safety Council than scholarship. But there's been a couple papers that I draw your attention to. One is Ray Fabius's paper earlier this year, trying to examine the hypothesis that stock market performance of companies achieving a high score on their Corporate Health Achievement Award, which is an award that is given out. And their 2016 study basically says, yeah, you know, those people who have safer companies do better in the stock market. And indeed, another paper written by Ron Getzel looked at the link between companies investing in health and safety, health and well-being, wellness programs, if you will, of their employees and the stock market performance. And that study supported the hypothesis that, yes, if you do invest in wellness programs in your company, that you will be a more high-performing company. So the question is, you know, to all of us, you know, what do you see your own self doing in a couple years? And here we have the answer: work that isn't done by a robot. So I think we all have to look at that. I want to thank you very much for your attention and hope it was fun, and happy to answer any burning questions that you all may have.
First question I'd ask is, will you make your references from this talk available?
Sure, yeah.
That'd be good. And then the second question...
A lot of them are embedded in the slides.
Okay.
The ones that are worthwhile.
The second one would be, how soon are we going to be replacing occupational physicians with robots?
Well, you know, like I said, you need to watch that YouTube video of Watson taking on the doctors. You know, I think that there are certain activities that doctors do, and that's why I put in the jobs that we replace diagnosticians. I think if you are looking at the patient story and some physical findings, obviously Watson couldn't examine the patient, but they gave him some physical findings, then he beat all the diagnosticians in terms of just, you know, going through picking up on somebody who walked into a hospital in Dallas that had just came back from Liberia, for instance, and the doctor missing it. So Watson did a better job at coming up with the diagnosis in the end. So the answer is I don't know, but certainly, a Da Vinci surgical machine and a Watson, these clinical decision-making algorithms that are being developed by companies, by Epic and these other electronic medical record companies, are going to certainly speed it along.
Thank you, John. So back to the concept of temporary workers. We hosted the young producer who put together that film that you alluded to on temp workers. And the thing that impressed me the most was what you brought up about the lack or the ambiguity between who is actually doing the safety training for these folks, whether it's the agency and or the business that they enter, or none of the above. Do you have any ideas why that has occurred?
Yeah, that's a big issue for OSHA, trying to figure out where who's doing. Obviously, OSHA wants the employees, obviously wants workers to be trained that are in hazardous situations. So OSHA has done a lot of outreach, to staffing associations, employee leasing companies on that issue. And they've cited, both the host as well as the agency that sends the employees out. But it is, I know in California we had to do a dual employer policy to be able to help people find their way through that thicket. But clearly general safety training, how to use personal protective equipment, and those types of things, can be done at the agency level. But when you get to the host, then responsibilities may shift a bit because the agency really doesn't know exactly what's going on at the host site. So then it may be purely the host site. What's really interesting, if you want to get into the thinking about this even more, in construction, there has been, for OSHA, a policy called the multi-employer worksite policy, where you can cite the general contractor, the creating employer, the exposing employer, the contractor. You can cite all of those individuals. But that's in construction. So the question is, can that policy be applied elsewhere by OSHA in a non-construction? It's an interesting one.
Dr. Howard, I had a question about the data. It's fascinating what you're saying about sensors, and the amount of data that we could potentially generate is enormous. But it's sort of like, okay, that's nice, but could that also run into some problems? Because if you have all this data, what kind of assurance do we have of the quality of the models in order to give us something meaningful in return?
Yes. Well, you make the ultimate point about big data and safety and health, is if you have all that data, how are you going to model it? How are you going to interpret it? What's the methodology of your analysis? I think that's where data scientists, formerly industrial hygienists, would have to exert their professional competence. And I've spoken to the AIHA back in 2007, and I said, you all are going to have to expand the scope of your practice. Sure, you're going to have to know all those historical ways that data was collected in the FAD. You're going to have to know how the little sensor that you're attaching everywhere in the workplace works and all that. But ultimately, it's all going to come to you, and you have to have the modeling to be able to figure it out. So to me, that's a scholarship issue within industrial hygiene program to be able to train data scientists of the future.
Thanks for the nice talk, Dr. Howard. I have a question about the data of everything becoming automated. And when you're in this business, you see the BLS and you see all the other statistics, and it's easy for us to see that that's where everything is going. But how do we get that data available to the public so that they can see that our manufacturing jobs aren't coming back? But as the service industries expand, that's where we need to focus on sending people. But how are they going to ever know that without being able to see the data? So it gets back into, we publish in all these papers that's funded through taxpayer money, but then they don't get access to it.
Yeah. Well, this is a wonderful comment, and I just want to say that we bleed with you, okay, at NIOSH, because we have a bunch of really dedicated scientists, like almost 2,000 of them, right? And so the thing that we have all been struggling with is, yes, you know, you get promoted because you got your paper in the Japanese journal of whatever. But who knows about it, you know, besides the cadre of scientists in your field? So for the last 10 years, you know, we have been struggling with that issue. How do we get the information out? How do we get research into practitioners' hands, primarily, to employers' hands and workers' hands? So we have tried, and I think succeeded in many ways, in a lot of different areas. You know, we're on Facebook. All of our films are on YouTube. We have a Wikipedia, 2 resident Wikipedians who write for Wikipedia. I'll just tell you a little story about our Wikipedian. Emily, who was in college in Chicago, and we hired her because she's been doing Wikipedia since she was 9. And she wrote a page for us on flock workers' lung, okay? It was a crummy page. We had it was like a paragraph in Wikipedia. I don't know who wrote it. She updated it, put pictures, etc. The next day, we had 4,800 hits. So I said to her, Emily, how did you do this? I mean, the page looks nice, but I mean, oh yeah, but how did anybody find it in 24 hours? Well, she knows the Google algorithms. So she had lung, worker, flock. She had all of those names, so her page became the first page after they entered all those things, because she knew the algorithm that Google uses, because Google and Wikipedia are like that. So you have to know how to get your information out. That was a big lesson for us. So we go to every conference now, and we tweet out all sorts of information. This conference I gave to our communications people, so they're maybe tweeting about it. We have all of our photos on Flickr. We have started doing any kind of social media outlet we can. And in fact, the newest one that we're doing is what's called Research Rounds, which every month we take research that NIOSH does and we break it down. The poor scientists can't do this, but we have to have these translators do this. So they break it down into these, first of all, 140 word tweets, but also a few sentences about, what's the impact of this thing? Why should you even read it? And nobody's going to read more than maybe 3 sentences. So reduce this fine 7-page paper in the American Journal of Epidemiology to 3 sentences. Of course, there are still scientists at NIOSH that are crying over that, but still, it gets it out. And then what's interesting is I've noticed in several listservs, the Protecting Workers Alliance, our research rounds, everybody takes it up and they start giving it to everybody. So, you have to get into the network of the people that you're trying to reach. And we're trying to do that through every means possible. And it gets to your point of getting science into people's hands that need it. So we're trying everything we can. And like I say, Emily is working for us. We have another Wikipedian, James, who does a lot of our other social media. It really is the way that people learn about you. We have sometimes in our retweets up to 1 million retweets. Now whether all of those people are really grasping what we wrote or not, but 1 million people is a hell of a lot more than we've ever been able to reach in the Japanese Journal of whatever.
Thanks, Dr. Howard, for a great talk. I have 2 questions, and one is, if we look at the growth in the service industry that you showed, and we know that a lot of those jobs are low paid, has there been any attention from NIOSH on looking at raising the minimum wage and how that influences health and quality of life for some of these service workers?
Yeah, NIOSH, extramural researchers may have done that. I don't think anybody within the Institute intramurally has done that. I've seen some studies from schools of public health. There was a great study that was published by Nicholas Krauss at UCLA with some folks in the Chinese immigrant community looking at wage theft and minimum wage issues and that. So I think there's a lot in the social sciences literature, maybe in schools of public health, that have those kinds of departments. I've seen a literature, but no one in NIOSH that I know is doing that. But I always say that, and then all of a sudden, somebody tells me, oh, but did you know about so-and-so? So,
Sure. Thanks. I also wondered, when you talked about the fact that Spain had their recession earlier than the U.S., Then as they saw all their jobs contracting and moving to more the temporary worker model, how did they cope with some of the economic changes for the workers in their country, or how did Spain respond? And were there any lessons learned from that experience?
Yeah, well, like I say, the literature. If you Google John, and it's Joan because it's Catalan, Benach, and I have several references here, in the slides. And you look at the literature; it's just amazing the mountain of literature that he has done. And he just spoke at a conference. He actually got his PhD at Hopkins, so he's been in the U.S. He spoke at a conference on work in Greece recently, and we had two of our researchers there. And he has an institute that's devoted to the study of quality employment and all of these issues, which just amazes me that in the U.S. we have been so asleep on this issue. So it really is somebody to Google, and he just wrote a paper in the 2014 Annual Reviews of Public Health, which I think is the one that anyone should read. And it really is a great paper summarizing his years of research.
Since you brought it up in your talk, I'm wondering if NIOSH as an agency or any of the federal agencies are working out some way of balancing predictive analytics from more traditional hypothesis testing science.
Yes, well, that's a very interesting question. It was interesting. We have a person in NIOSH who has really done a deep dive in this area, and he's been looking at comparing and contrasting the two, and clearly, the theory, the Wired article theory is that you don't need to worry about, epidemiologists don't need to worry about representativeness. You're going to have all the data, so it doesn't matter. So, and the example that was used in the article, which is 2008, and then later on, was Google flu trends. So everybody says, CDC takes forever, you can't tell what's going on, they have to get the blood from the lab and blah, blah. So Google flu trends was forecasting. They look at the comparison between Google flu trends and what CDC ultimately did. Google flu trends way overestimated the prevalence of H1N1 because they were counting every time somebody went in a pharmacy and bought Claritin, You could have allergies, they didn't have H1N1. So so some of that data, as we were talking about, the gentleman raised here, it's that whole issue about, this is really exciting, it's wonderful, but Wired is the National Enquirer of Science. So you have to come down back to reality and figure out, yes, we are going to have a lot of data. How do we use it best to be able to get out some insights, scientifically based insights? And that's a whole different thing than just looking at a whole bunch of data and sort of mouthing off. And then the two worlds are very different.
So as we look, sir, at how to how to make sure we understand the data and interpret it properly, and how you've got two full-time Wikipedians on staff. That's a new word, I guess.
Yeah, it's a new word.
How do we translate this into a little security, I hate to be practical, but for the ERCs, so that it isn't every year, are we here or not?
That thing. Well, you get a new president, who knows what will happen. But, as I've always told the ERCs, number one is it's your problem, not mine, because I can't lobby, okay? Government agencies can't go to the Hill and lobby for themselves. All we can do is try to give you the information and the power to be able to show the value that your work and the work that NIOSH funds brings to workers in America and brings to their representatives, be it in the Senate or the House of Representatives. And I think, first of all, you guys have done a great job because it's done now year 5, 6, whatever we're into. So you guys have done a great job. I think the continued job, no matter who is in the administration or who your representative is, you have to show value and you have to be able to communicate, as the gentleman was asking here, how do we get that science that we're doing into short bites that really tell the person, unless we do this, things are really going to be bad. They're going to be bad for your constituents, they're going to be bad for you. And that's what we do. We're going to protect you because we're doing this kind of science. So, and you guys do a great job doing that. So you'll be able to address a new administration pretty soon.
Hi, In your presentation, you talk about data science as kind of the future. Why does Luxembourg have so many data scientists, and what can America do to stimulate growth in that area?
Yeah, that's interesting. Luxembourg, it would be interesting. Luxembourg, 80% of people in Luxembourg are immigrants. So certain presidential candidates might have a hard time with that. But, it's a very high immigrant country, and a lot of companies in Europe are doing their computer science, in Luxembourg and stuff. But if you go to any internet company that's happening now, you'll find this interesting marriage between computer scientists, programmers, traditional people who took statistics and got a master's or PhD in that genre, or even people who did epidemiology, people who are used to looking at a lot of data, no matter what they were called before. They're sort of all melding into this new occupation. And I think the U.S. is well represented, but in the new technological industries, not so much in the older industries. And I think that if you go to the school, the university has a school of computer science, or somewhere, right? So you go knock on their door and you say, can we collaborate together to figure out how to look at data analytics from our perspective, et cetera. The natural heirs to all of this new data scientist occupation are already here in a school of public health. They're statisticians, they're people who deal with data all the time, and sometimes big data, lots of data. Now at NIOSH, we're looking at surveys of 30, 40, 50,000 people with lots of different types of data. So, there's nothing that would inhibit scientists in the traditional public health or occupational health communities from joining that larger community. They may lack some internet skills, but at NIOSH what we did is we formed an IT forum, and we got all the people that were all distributed across the Institute that really know IT, and we put them in one group, and they meet every month, and they interact then with other types of scientists, and these are people that are not necessarily the research scientists, but they support the research. It's a very interesting group. We started it like 10 years ago. I thought it would, flop actually because I started, so anything I touch, they go, oh, the director wants it, therefore we're not going to do it. But, they've been going for 10 years. I left at the first meeting and they're still going. So there's something real happening in data. Yes? Yeah, I think the precision medicine initiative and personalized medicine, immunotherapy, and all those things are not going to go away with the administration. I mean, they're cancer therapeutics, period. I mean, that's the way it's going to happen. NIOSH doesn't do direct medical care issues. What we've been trying to do, though, is look at the role of genetics in the workplace and in worker diagnostics, in biomarkers and things like that. We've done a lot of research in beryllium sensitization and the genetic profile for beryllium sensitization. So, there's certain little pockets of that are going on. Paul Schulte and I wrote a paper in the 2013 annual review of public health on genetics in the workplace. So we're starting to get into that. I'm now working on a paper on synthetic biology and occupational risk, looking at lentiviruses, which are derived from HIV, they're long-acting viruses, and the insertional mutagenesis risk associated with that, or the design non-replicating lentivirus that suddenly merges with other genetic material and becomes replicating. So, there's lots of interesting issues in that area of personalized medicine, which is another way of describing how to use genetics to cure somebody.
Oh, I didn't know I was going to get the last question, but
the last question.
You were very
make it good. This is the last question.
You were very clairvoyant in answering at least half of my question.
Oh, okay.
But it has to do with the big data associated with pharmaceuticals. And the number of new drugs being introduced by the pharmaceutical industry is going up as you know, almost exponentially, which means that the number of drug interactions are probably exponentially squared. And so I think
you need a robot and an algorithm to help you figure that out.
Okay.
No human being could handle that.
But the number of interactions is so huge, I think, that I think occupational health and safety could get a group of people together from computer science, from occupational physicians, from economists, and I mean, you could go on the line to have a group of 4 or 5 people to really zero in, to cut and dice all of the information that's coming in and show how this could be minimized in terms of bad drug interactions.
So they have a school of pharmacy here, right? Isn't it nearby? We need to walk over there and intrigue them into this. Great question. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
So I just want to thank Dr. Howard again for a wonderful and fun presentation. And before we adjourn to go out for the poster session and reception, I just want to also present Dr. Howard with a remembrance from our symposium. Well, you may not think so. But anyway, I just want to remind you, yes, this is a miniature version of the loon, which is our state bird. And this has been a tradition to actually give a much bigger loon as a gift. And in 2010, we presented Dr. Howard with a loon. And I just have to remind you that there is actually a very specific sound of the loon. This is it, okay?
It's lovely.
But what Dr. Howard said was, "It's a duck, it's a duck." And he kept saying it, "It's a duck." We tried to tell him it wasn't a duck. But anyway, so now we do have a duck for him because we think he would appreciate that much more. And this is also a very favorite bird of ours in the region.
Oh, my God. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
So on the plaque, it says, "Minnesota will call you back."
Oh, my God.
And we do hope you will come back again and again. Thank you very much. And thank you, all the audience.